I want Jesus to walk with me. I want Jesus to walk with me all along my pilgrim journey. Lord, I want Jesus to walk with me. Amen. The first time I heard this hymn was when I was in choir in college. What struck me about it the first time I sang it was how beautiful it felt to sing. As many of you know, especially you choir folks, singing different kinds of music feels differently. Where the notes are in our vocal range, the length we hold these notes, the consonants and vowels that are used, all shape how the singing feels in our bodies. There is a music theory as well. If a song is in a major key, it embraces the whole notes like it is making space for our joy to reside. This hymn is in a minor key, so it spends quite a bit of time in the tensions of the half steps, the feelings of incompleteness, almost like someone is crying or wailing. Instead of glossing over pain and suffering, this song sits with it, honors it, and gives voice to it. Whenever I hear musicians talk about how they came to do music, I feel like I often hear a similar story. Maybe they discovered at a young age that they were naturally adept at music. They had perfect pitch, or they could sound their voice like a trumpet before they could even speak. Maybe they grew up in a musical family, and so their natural talent was nurtured from a young age. Whenever I hear stories like this, I feel a bit of jealousy because they are not at all like my own. I did not have much natural musical talent as a child, and it was not something that I was encouraged to develop. Being an athlete was much preferred to being an artist. I have always loved to sing, but learning how to stay on pitch and hold my body and muscles in the proper way was an arduous process that took years to learn, and I still have to practice regularly. Unlike music, I don't think I have ever met anyone who is naturally adept at lament. We usually act a lot more like Peter does in our gospel reading. I know some people look at Peter with disdain here, but his reaction actually feels really normal to me. What we miss out on in this chunk of text is that 2 verses before this section begins, Peter confesses that Jesus is the Messiah, the Christ, the one who has come to make everything right. And then Jesus turns around and talks about suffering, rejection, and death. I can imagine that this would be hard for Peter to wrap his head around, not only because it would mean the end to his hope for political and social freedom, but also because Jesus was his friend. It is quite a bit easier to hide our feelings of sadness and hopelessness behind other emotions, like anger. It is hard to lament when lament seems like the end. Though this passage does not record Peter's reaction to Jesus after this exchange, I can't imagine his reply brought any comfort. If any want to become my followers, let them deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. The disciples had no idea how literal Jesus was being when he talked about taking up his cross. When I read the New Testament reading for this week, I found myself startled. As he often does, St. Paul is doing a midrash, a practice of Jewish theological reinterpretation on our Old Testament protagonists, Abraham and Sarah. He's doing this to teach his listeners about the importance of faith. There is this sentence in his argument that I'm pretty sure my eyes skipped over the first time I read it this week because it seemed so out of place. And then the second time, it hit me like a ton of bricks. In the presence of the God in whom he believed, who gives life to the dead and calls into existence the things that do not exist. Who gives life to the dead and calls into existence the things that do not exist. That is the thing about Jesus. He was no ordinary guy taking up his cross. He was God who gives life to the dead and calls into existence things that do not exist, taking up his cross. We are in the liturgical season of taking up our crosses. There is no season quite like Lent for looking sin and death straight in the face. And this year especially, we have quite a bit to look at. The cross was a death-dealing instrument crafted to maximize suffering. As we talk about the cross, we should remember the death-dealing instruments of suffering in our world today. This past week marked 1 year since the lynching of Ahmaud Arbery, whose only crime was going on a run where white men didn't think he should. It was also the 9-year mark since the lynching of Trayvon Martin. I found out this week that Trayvon Martin and I would have been the same age. He was born only 19 days before me. As we come down from the third wave of the pandemic and eagerly await our turn for the vaccine, there is so much loss we have experienced. The disease has brought more than just fear of the virus, but broken relationships, lost trust, systemic inequality, and so much more. Another effect of the virus has been a rise in anti-Asian racism, especially in verbal and physical abuse connected to the racist rhetoric of American politicians and public leaders. And I can think of no more appropriate reaction to these things than lament. And yet, it is so much easier to ignore how uncomfortable, heartbroken, and hopeless we feel. But when we do that, we miss out on what the man on the cross can do with it. As miserable and painful as the cross is, it is also the very place where God begins to give life to the dead and call into existence things that do not exist. Just like singing, lament is also something we need to practice, especially in our society. We've gotten really good at finding ways to avoid lamenting. Sometimes it's avoidance, distraction, self-harm, or self-medicating. Acknowledging suffering is painful and sometimes even an overwhelming process. But there are things we can do to honor our grief while we take care of ourselves and the toll that it takes on us. Being gentle with ourselves while we lament is so important. Processing grief is a wild ride, and we can help our bodies process what's happening by paying attention to what they're asking for when we lament. Maybe that's a good cry, a nap, or if you're like me, the nap comes after the good cry. Finding someone to talk to, or eating when your body asks for food, even if it's 5 p.m. and you're about to start cooking dinner. We can learn postures for lament, where we can give voice to our suffering and the suffering of those we love without inflicting pain on them or on ourselves. This might look like giving yourself the time and space to feel your emotions in whatever form they're present, whether that is in tears, anger, or something else. We don't need to be naturally good at lament to be able to make something beautiful come out of it. Lent teaches us that lament is not a motion we must go through in order to be free of it. Just as Lent is on the path to Easter, so lament is on the path to resurrection and new creation. When we ask to walk with Jesus, it also means that we are asking to take up our cross and follow him. Even as we take up our cross to follow Jesus, we can be confident that we are walking with a compassionate and creative God who finds a way to bring beautiful things into the world and where we did not think that was possible. Please pray with me. In my sorrows, Lord, walk with me. In my sorrows, Lord, walk with me. When my heart within is aching, I want Jesus to walk